My wife had stayed back in Minneapolis until I could get this chore done and was a block away. I was mugged for the first time and lost my entire fortune, and it really didn't get any better after that. And in the next 6 months, my wife was also mugged, and our apartment was broken into 3 times, and a friend of a neighbor upstairs was murdered to death murdered in the hallway, and the janitor at the church that abutted our patio was bludgeoned and spent 3 months in the hospital recovering, and the house on the corner opposite us was bombed. And then, somewhat terrified and unhappy, we began to make our way back to the Midwest. And eventually, I found myself, of all things, in western Minnesota, in a farm town, the place I had fervently hoped I would never again be. And there felt at home in some way that I didn't quite understand. And I wanted to think about what that feeling of the homeness was. And so I sat down to write. That's really when my writing started. And the very first thing that I wrote after I started this examination was the piece that opens the book that became Journal of a Prairie Year. I'm going to share just a piece of that with you. The prairie, I wrote, is like a daydream. It is one of those plainly visible things that you can't photograph. No camera lens can take in a big enough piece of it. The prairie landscape embraces the whole of the sky. Its image is globular, but without the distortion you get in a wide-angle lens. Any undistorted image is too flat to represent the impression of immersion that is central to being on the prairie. It is a kind of baptism. The moon is the closest of the celestial objects. It makes the largest image. It affords the best light for prolonged examination. It is visible in the greatest detail, but no amount of walking will get you any closer to it, and you can never reach out and touch it. The prairie, in this respect, resembles the moon. Its essential feature is its horizon, which you can neither walk to nor touch. It is like the horizon of the sea. We are helpless as babies about this. Whatever we can see and do not understand and must acknowledge, we make over in our own image. The moon, the sea, the prairie, all present insurmountable barriers of distance. We cross them on the craft of egocentricity. We make the moon the marker of time and the dwelling place of desire. The sea, the mirror, the bosom. The prairie, the breadbasket. Newcomers to the prairie are at first disconcerted by its nakedness. Later, they will wish it weren't so private. To live on the prairie is to daydream. It is the only conceivable response to such immensity. It is when we are smallest that our daydreams come quickest. I drove north across the prairie daydreaming and taking notes. When I got to Winnipeg, my notes stopped. Downtown Winnipeg is everything the open prairie is not. Swirls of unruly traffic, swarms of pedestrians, towering masses of glass and steel. If you don't scurry about, you make a nuisance of yourself and invite attention as a person apparently without gainful employment. I stayed in the big railroad hotel downtown. The second morning I was in Winnipeg, I was intimidated by the rush of traffic into making a wrong turn, and before I had realized what I had done, was out of the city. Figuring I might as well enjoy being lost, I turned off onto a road that promised to lead through the countryside. By and by, I happened upon Lower Fort Garry, which was once a provisioning outpost of the Hudson Bay Company, and is now a kind of Williamsburg. It was a blustery and chilly day. I was glad to be inside the walls. A young cook in a bonnet offered me a still warm, coals-baked oatmeal cookie. I was emboldened by it to venture out through the gates of the fort and stand clutched against a tree along the banks of the Red River of the North. The wind howled. Even the gulls seemed to be having a hard time of it. I went back to Winnipeg through marginal farmlands along what was once the bottom of a great sea. I had no trouble finding the city. It loomed out of the landscape like an enormous tree. I saw the city then as a fortress. I saw what walls we build against the prairie, how timidly we huddle together, how effectively we close off its vastness and make for ourselves another space of more human dimensions. I couldn't say what to make of it. I drove the 600 miles home through rain, through mist, through sunshine. What I saw in every light, until I was obsessed with seeing it, was that nearly every inch of the land along the way had been painstakingly turned over, furrow by furrow. It seemed some unknowable comment on the human spirit, that we should, despite our walls, have turned ourselves into such an awesome army of Lady Macbeths, rubbing out so relentlessly such a terrible space. I don't suppose that writers really choose their subjects. In some way, those seem given to you. And most of my work has been, since then, concerned in one way or another with the landscape and the natural world. It's a preoccupation that I understand some 249,990,000 approximately of the 250,000 people in this country don't share. But there it is. And I have tended to write works of nonfiction. But there's one sense, I think, in which my own nonfiction shares something with every piece of fiction, and that is that what interests me in every one of these landscapes that I've explored is what is inexpressible, what is essentially mysterious at the heart of the experience. I've tried to express that in a number of ways. Here's a little excerpt from an unfinished essay, actually. It's from the third book to come, which I'm now actively working on. And it tries to say something, at least about what I'm up to, what I've discovered. The setting here is Isle Royal in Lake Superior. I descended the Minong Ridge at the place where it crosses one branch of the upper reaches of Washington Creek. I was just about to set my right boot onto a stepping stone when a dark, lithe, long-tailed animal slipped around an alder and disappeared into a thicket of shrubs. I had a second's look at it, if that, before it had vanished. A cursory exploration in the direction it had gone revealed no evidence of a readable footprint. Perhaps if I had not been so intent on getting to Windigo before the store closed, I did not yet know that it hadn't opened. If I had been alone, if there hadn't been a boat to meet in the morning, if I hadn't committed myself to obligations that bound me to meeting it, perhaps if I had ever learned to travel freely or believed more deeply in the opportunities the moment brings, I might have unburdened myself of my pack and gone in search of that fleeting image. But I didn't. I looked where the creature had gone, replayed the image of it in my eye, stepped to the opposite shore of the little stream and trudged uphill, beads of sweat gathering in the small of my back, hoping that some less evanescent presence might appear along the way to compensate for the loss. I thought that it might have been an ermine in summer coat, or a mink, or even an otter. Most likely I decided it was a mink. Later that day, I would claim to have seen one, and to have been pleased at the sight of it, but it was the kind of lie we tell when we are disappointed. The truth was, I had seen a fleeting shadow for a brief moment, a thin thread of experience, and had embroidered it into a story. We tell stories like this all the time. One's life is, in a strange way, the sum of them. I can see it even now, a long time later, just as if it had freshly happened. The glance to the left, where the tan water ran through the green stems of a marsh marigold bright with golden flower, the flurry of motion, the flash of visual data, long, live, brown or black, with tail. It remains one of my most vivid impressions of Isle Royale. I have stored it with 100,000 other impressions just like it of 1,000 other places. I want to extract them, make them solid, and render them as something concrete, a collage maybe, or a quilt. See, I could then say, this is the essence of wildness. This is what we must not forget. How brief life is. How unexpected. How little of it we glimpse. How rapidly it changes. I, like the next person, struggle to make sense of what I have seen and heard. I tell stories about wild places as if I had discovered anything at all. If I told the truth, everything I described would be indistinct and on the run. This would be a true picture of the wild places I have known, including those of my own heart. I would be standing at the center of the frame, and at its edges one would see the tails of things, mysterious and alluring, their owners dashing discreetly for cover. Novelist friend of mine, John Hassler, tells about going to his cabin to write for the summer, and while he was there, having the plumbing in his house absolutely collapse. So he called the local plumber, who came and dismantled the toilet and entered the house with his long snake and was down there digging around in the bowels of his sewerage. And eventually, as John tells the story, he was literally up to his elbows in you-know-what. And in the midst of this, as John was watching, the man lifted his head and said, "Say, aren't you that fellow that writes novels?" And John said, yes, I am, as a matter of fact. And the plumber shook his head, looked at him, said, "Hell of a way to make a living." It is, you know, most of us don't get to be Jane Smileys. Most of us while away our lives in obscure corners, ill-paid and under-noticed. That's the way it is. So for those of you who are thinking about reading writers, I want to read just a piece of this essay only because I want to tell you the story about it. This is an essay that I wrote originally as the first chapter of a book called The Necessity of Empty Places. When I'd finished the book, I sent it off to my agent, and she read it, and she said, she called me up after she'd read it, and she said, "Well, I like the book very much. It's a good book. It's a weird book, but I like it. It's all right." And except for one thing, there's that first chapter just has to go. That's just hopeless. Take it out. So I'm a compliant sort of person, I took it out. But then it happened some months later that I was then contributing a monthly essay to a magazine I much enjoyed contributing to, a magazine called Minnesota Monthly, which has since become a rag, but it was once a wonderful magazine. One of the things I particularly liked about publishing for it was that it was a marvelously articulate audience and quick to tell you when you had done right or wrong. I once mistook an iris for a pupil, and I got in a creature's eye, and I got a flood of nasty letters from people who wondered if I could really be that stupid. So I published this piece in the magazine. I didn't have anything else that month, and so I sent it off. And as it happened, it was the single piece of 36 that I published in this series which drew not a single response from anybody. Just a deafening silence that could be heard all over the Midwest descended in the wake of the publication of this essay. And well, I still sort of liked it, was the truth. And so I'd been invited to give a reading at the Minneapolis Public Library, and I went down there one noon. It was one of these brown bag things, and read this essay to the audience that was assembled there, and same thing happened. Just most of the audience was gone long before the essay was, and those few who remained were mainly crumpling their paper bags and looking bored to death. And well, I thought it was a bad haul, and it was lunchtime, and people were tired, and so I had one more ace in the hole. I sent this essay off to a friend of mine. Every writer ought to have one friend like this, but not two. One of those friends who can be counted on to say that absolutely everything you've done is brilliant, just the best thing you've ever written. I couldn't put it down. I wept for 3 nights. Oh, thank heavens there's a Paul Gruco, she will say. So I sent this essay to her, and by and by came a letter from her. She said, well, it was interesting. And I would sure like to see it when it's finished. Well, I'm dumb, but I'm not aggressively dumb, I like to think. So I just put it away and didn't think any more of it. The version of it that I'm going to read to you is from a volume called The Best American Essays. And as a matter of fact, it has since been translated into Russian and French and German, and if some of you are freshmen, you might be inflicted with it in one of your freshman readers. It's absolutely the most successful piece of writing I ever did. So you never know. I mean, that's the way writing is. The essay is called Bones. I was just going to read read the end section of it. One of the habits I had as a child, which sets up the title, was the collecting of bones, and this figures in the end of this essay. I have been talking, this is the title of the book which will be out next year, A House of Many Mansions. I've been talking earlier in this essay about the many mansions in which I lived as a child on my farm, the Pond Mansion and the River Mansion and the Black Walnut Mansion and so on. And then I say, now I live in a single house of 8 rooms, from which I venture forth into nature as a tourist. Most mornings I walk from my house around a shallow prairie lake to the 2-room office in which I spend my days pacing, writing, reading, and staring out of the 2nd-story windows in the canopy, into the canopy of a black walnut tree. It buds, it leaves, it flowers, it bears nuts. The yellow-green nuts turn brown and fall. The green leaves turn yellow and flutter to the earth. In the winter, I watch frozen pieces of it break off in the wind and scatter to the earth. In spring, the tree buds again. Some would call this a cycle, the eternal cycle of nature, and find comfort in it. I don't. The tree is a little less young each spring, and so am I. Our time is running out. For the tree, as for me, the path is linear, not cyclical, and the end of the line is death. The best that can be said in the meantime is that neither of us has moved. The skies beyond the tree change. One day dawns clear, the next cloudy. Some days rain patters against the window glass. Some mornings the branches of the walnut are white with rime frost, others with new snow. The wind blows or doesn't. In the heated and air-conditioned solitude of my study, it is all the same. One summer afternoon a couple of years ago, the sky suddenly turned as black as ink. The street lights switched on. A stillness fell, so deafening that it intruded even into my already silent rooms. Rain began to pour in torrents, as it does in a tropical forest, but the downpour was swept and swirled by violent winds that howled in the corners of the building. As suddenly as the rain came, so came the hail, thundering down upon the rooftop and smashing against the windows. One by one, the panes of glass shattered as I cowered in the middle of the outer room, paralyzed with awe and fear. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the storm cloud passed. The branches of the walnut tree hung in tatters, and icy water puddled in the windowsills where the rain had been driven through the holes in the sharded glass. In the streets, mist had already begun to rise from the hail drifts, dissipating in the blazing heat of the sun. $10 million damage in 10 minutes in a small prairie town. I thought of an outburst of John Barrowman's I'd witnessed on another summer day. Suddenly, while walking to the auditorium center stage to deliver a lecture on James Joyce, Barrowman, the great poet, and he had a sort of toddly way of moving. He was quite ill, even then. He was working on the dream songs. One day, as he was coming down the aisle, he fell asleep, we realized it. Just standing there, holding his briefcase. But he was such an august person, he had won the Pulitzer Prize by then, and many others, that nobody dared to wake him. Not even his teaching assistant, who went to get the dean, who came to wake him. On this day, while advancing to his lectern, he suddenly smashed a chair into the orchestra pit and bellowed incoherently against janitors. "The function of janitors at the University of Minnesota," he said, "is to keep professors from getting to their lecturns." It was good for them. He later wrote of us, his bewildered students, "A Zen touch, action in the midst of thought." But most days are not graced with such drama. They come to a close and I walk home, noticing perhaps whether it is hot or cold, windy or calm, passing through a landscape so familiar that I have ceased to see it, ready to take up residence for the night in the only house I now know, a gray one of 8 rooms, a tight fortress against the world beyond its windows. I take the telephone off the hook, throw the junk mail unopened into the wastebasket, and sit in my brown chair in the yellow light of the lamp, listening to piano music arranged on a compact disc in the order that someone else has determined would please me. There are rooms in that house that I seldom visit, and so far as I am concerned, there are no other houses anywhere else in the wide world. When I want to visit the world in which I once lived, I consult my maps, arrange my schedule, embark on an expedition to the local stores for perishable supplies, pack the car, and set out from my house, fearful sometimes, but full of new energy too, as a tourist always is at the beginning of a journey. And when I arrive and set out on foot into some untamed place, I come sooner or later to a bone or a shell, and often I pick it up and carry it home with me. I keep my souvenirs here in my office with me, and on the mantel of the fireplace in my house, the tooth of a bison washed out of the mud of a Nebraska stream bed, the carapace of a horseshoe crab picked up in a Florida mangrove swamp, a bowl full of fossil shark teeth collected on a Gulf Coast beach, the shell of a land snail found in the sandy arroyo of the Baja Desert, the jawbone of a cow from the Great Basin of Wyoming, the antler of a white-tailed deer shed in the North Woods, the skull of a mule deer attacked by coyotes on Montana's Front Range. Every bone reminds me of many others that I left uncollected somewhere when I was out hunting for lost mansions. Like the prophet, I have walked in a valley full of bones. But the remarkable thing, in fact, is that one finds so few bones. Millions of creatures die every day. Where are their remains? Where have they all gone? And as for the creatures dying but not yet dead, where are they? You can walk for 1,000 miles and never once see a creature dying. Death is nothing if not discreet. The bones, everyone, are miracles. The alms nature offers to life. We do not easily accept miracles. They seem to fall between the boundaries, beyond the boundaries of cause and effect. But a miracle is nothing more than a story that begins after the cause and ends before the effect. It is the mysterious void at the heart of the story, the space between the particles of an atom that makes the substance of things possible. The miracle of a bone is that it is a moment frozen. A bone is the evidence of a life unprecedented and never to be repeated, which, though it has vanished, nevertheless endures in the bone. A faint white glimmering in some offhand place of life everlasting. Here's a little story. It's a little piece of a story about being lost. And it introduces the subject of home, which I want to spend a couple of minutes with before I close here. I'm in the mountains in Wyoming or Montana. I don't know which. And have been lost for some long time. And have gone down to the lake where I have made a camp to get some water. And have scared up there a moose, the only living thing I've seen for some days, which runs away. My grandmother had little interest in words, none so far as I know in painting or any other kind of ornament. She cooked by boiling and blanching, did not raise flowers, avoided jewelry, was content with the plain white walls of her house, except for a plastic plaque that hung near the dinette set in the living dining room. Earth hath no sorrow that heaven cannot cure, it said. The words were framed in a garland of roses. I thought as a boy that it was an incredibly beautiful expression. It reminded me of a hymn that we sang often at church. I'm but a stranger here, heaven is my home. Earth is a desert drear, heaven is my home. Danger and sorrow stand round me on every hand. Heaven is my fatherland, heaven is my home. We believed that. I myself believed it as devoutly as anything. Earth was a rough spot, dangerous, unfair, cruel, to be gotten over, endured, on the way to heaven. In part, of course, we needed an explanation, an excuse for lives without wealth or status or influence. As Jesus might endure the humiliation of living as an infant to fulfill the promise of God, so we might suffer the indignities of earth to achieve the glories of our final destiny. We might be nobodies here, but the day was coming when the somebodies of this earth would find the tables turned. But there was a good deal more in our sense of alienation than that. Something more encompassing than religious dogma. A feeling that had been building in us as human beings for millions of years, at least for the thousands of years since we had become rational and literate. Once, a long time ago, we saw ourselves as indistinguishable from nature. In our animistic world, trees and worms and bears, no less than human beings, had souls and were bound together with us in a common existence. Life then was hard and short and uncertain. We were cold and hungry and beset by fears of many kinds. But we were not, I think, in the modern sense, quite so lonely, quite so afflicted with the sense of alienation. From life, we say, but really from nature. How should I learn to live in the same world with the moose? I did not know. I came down to the edge of the water, and it fled from me, and never looked back. I watched it go, and felt rebuked. At dawn the next morning, I crept down to the pond on all fours, and hid behind a boulder of granite, hoping in vain that it would come again to feed on the lilies glinting with frost. I asked of it a certain intimacy, and it spoke to me only of great distances. It was then that I began to feel truly lost. In the country where I grew up, we had home places. The home place was the place that was at the center of your family's life. It was the place everybody identified with you, even if you didn't live there anymore. If you said, we're going to have a party Saturday night at the home place, people knew where to go, even if it wasn't a place that was connected with you now. And I think we've lost a great deal in having lost that sense of homeness. So in the new book, which will be out this fall, I've written a bit about that subject, and just a couple of paragraphs from that meditation. This is It's an odd book. It's a book of hours in the old medieval sense. It takes the canonical hours of the monks. And this book is set in the North Woods. And so it happens in the course of 24 hours, and it begins with a lauds at 3 in the morning and ends with a compline. And these are just a few paragraphs from the Vespers, the prayers that would have been said at 9 p.m. I sit on a rock at the edge of the water in the gathering darkness, staring into the depths of the lake and thinking of something Thoreau said when he was perhaps in a similar mood about Walden Pond. A lake, he said, is the landscape's most beautiful and expressive feature. It is Earth's eye, looking into which the beholder measures the depth of his own nature. Down the lake, a solitary loon cries. The sound is low and mournful. It is sometimes mistaken for the howl of a wolf. I think that the cry might have come from my own heart. When it echoes back across the water, it echoes also inside me, and the reverberations do not die away. I shiver and button my wool shirt and pull a jacket over it. But I think it is not the sudden coldness alone that stirs within me. In a few months, I will be as old as my father was when he died. I can see him now, looking up at me out of the depths of the lake. He is smiling. He always wanted to be in a place like this, but he never found the time or the means to get here. I see that it did not matter, that he is here now, and always was. 45 years was the span of his life. Thoreau was the same age when he died. This rock has been here for 2 billion years. Somewhere, loons have been crying for 100 million years. There were already loons when the shore I sit upon was still buried within the heart of a great mountain. Long before the Rocky Mountains, there were loons. Somewhere a wolf is prowling. I can feel it in my bones. I can feel the vibrations in this stone. 30 million years ago, there were wolves. In an hour, I will hear one howling. Before the ice came, it was already howling. 9,000 years ago, this lake was here. 8,000 years ago, on a night very like this one, an ancestor of mine sat upon this boulder. A loon was crying, and its cry echoed across these waters, and the echo reverberated in my kin's heart, and it reverberates still. Tonight, I have a session with myself. I look into the eye of the earth, and I find there myriad things coming forth and expressing themselves: flowers, poets, fathers, lakes, mountains, wolves, loons, boulders of granite, both inside my body and out of it. I found, after all, the thing I was looking for, the home place. It is here, I see, everywhere, and inside me, where it always was. I rise, go up the hill and build a fire against the chill and the darkness. It crackles and spits. Idly I stir a stick in the coals until it glows and wave it, writing a neon dance in the night. I stare absent-mindedly into the orange and blue flames, hypnotized by them in the ancient way, feeling myself letting go of my body. My eyelids begin to droop, neither with weariness nor with sleepiness, but with peace. The fire has burned itself down. I bank the coals and turn in, At first the sleeping bag feels clammy and chill, but it warms quickly. It is good to be confined within the bag after so much movement. Good to be in the embrace again of solid ground after so much water. I turn once or twice or 3 times, discover the way my body fits best against the contours of the ground, and close my eyes, hoping that I might awaken in the night to hear gentle rain against the fly of the tent or the lapping of water against rock. Then I might fall asleep a second time, a proper lullaby in my ears, bringing gentle dreams. Thank you very much. I would be happy to entertain questions or comments. Yes.
Wonderful stuff.
Well, thank you.
And a lot of it about the country that I've spent some time in northern Minnesota.
Yes.
And it calls up the same feelings you described so eloquently. But last couple of trips, I was pretty startled, saddened to see the effects of acid rain.
Yes.
Mercury levels in the lakes up there. I'm just wondering how you reconcile this great love for landscape and this particular landscape and that sort of gentle voice that it calls up in you with the knowledge that it's dying.
Yes, it is dying. When you enter the boundary waters, where this last piece was set, at all of the entry points, among other things, you see signs warning you. This is the largest wilderness preserve east of the Mississippi River. And it was the first national forest to be preserved as wilderness, as a matter of fact, so it has some historical significance that goes back some time. And you see signs warning you not to eat the fish that you catch, because they're so poisoned with metal contaminants falling out of the rain from the factories farther north in Canada and up the shore of Lake Superior, that those aren't safe. I've said, I suppose, in a sense about my own work, that what I'm really doing, certainly this is true of prairies, and it's true of that country increasingly too, that what I'm really doing is the only thing I can think to do, because I doubt the value of preaching. I read Green Eggs and Ham to my children hundreds of times. I think they loved it, but not even 200 readings of it, say, could persuade either one of them to try a new kind of food. So I thought that proved conclusively that preaching doesn't work. So the alternative is to write what I imagine that I'm writing, which is, in effect, a kind of elegy. I think of myself as writing elegies. Many poets write elegies to dead friends. And in a way, I suppose I'm writing elegies to dying landscapes, in the hope that we will eventually be moved to understand what we're doing and to move in the direction that the preaching might want to make us move anyway. One feels certainly ineffectual against this, but it is the best thing I know. My Minnesota friend Carol Bly gives me a hard time about this. She's a sort of cranky woman, as you may know, and she called up to give me a very hard time about something I had said recently, because she thought I was being soft-headed about it, and so I pointed out to her what I really meant, and she called back and said, I'd forgotten. Yes, you're the person who always says everything the nice way. Well, I suppose you're right, and I'm going to learn to do that one of these next decades myself. But it does tend to be my way in classrooms and in the landscape too, to want to sing praises and to make psalms, and to hope that there's some effectiveness in that. I don't know. Yes.
Yeah, I have a number of students here from a nonfiction seminar,
Yeah.
graduate seminar. Do you have any words of advice or inspiration for nonfiction writers who want to get published?
Oh, who want to get published, too. Well,
That's the tricky part.
yeah. You know the economic facts, of course, of life. We ought to start there if you're thinking about this. James Michener had it exactly right. He said, you can make a fortune in this country by being a writer, but you can't make a living at it.